Senator Bob Hall of the 2nd Senate District, representing a variety of counties, including Dallas County. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. So you passed a bill in the state Senate last week that would seek to eliminate voting centers on election day. Why is this important to you?
Well, let me make sure we get the terminology right.
Okay.
It's not that we're eliminating voting centers. It's that we are moving to precinct only. You have to vote in your precinct. Now they can have polling places or voting centers in there, but everyone needs to go to their precinct to vote in their precinct. On
election day, right?
On election day.
But the voting centers would still be allowed during early voting.
That's correct.
Okay. Why is this important to you, and what is behind this bill?
It's the overall reform for our election process to bring more transparency, accountability, and a system in which we could actually have confidence that we know the outcomes are a reflection of what the voters actually intended. Our system is extremely complicated. The data changes form and locations numerous times, and having the precinct votes spread out all over the county really makes it almost impossible to reconcile what the vote would be in the precinct for each candidate. I wrote a paper on it a while back calling our election systems the black box, and that they're not very transparent. There's really no accountability, and the outcome, the accuracy of the outcome is actually unknowable because of the way the data is handled and the lack of reconciliation that takes place between the precinct and the county, and between the county and the state. And so this is one of several changes which over time we have been very quick to sacrifice security for convenience. And I think our elections are one of the absolute most important things we do as citizens, and that the citizens need to have a high degree of confidence that the outcome of the election is consistent with the intent of the voters.
I want to go back to what you said. What specifically in your mind is taking place that doesn't necessarily reflect the transparency by allowing people to vote anywhere in the county on election day? What isn't taking place in your mind that is taking place for the early vote where people can vote anywhere?
Well, we're taking this a step at a time. I very much would have liked to gone to precinct voting for both early voting and election day. Matter of fact, I would like to see us move away from having a separate early voting and a separate election day. I think we should join 21 other states in just having an in-person election period in which people vote, and the rules for handling the votes, for counting the votes, the management of the system would be the same. Right now, it's exceptionally complicated because we have one set of rules for early voting, another set of rules for election day, and another set of rules for mail-in ballots. It creates a great deal of confusion and complication. We only need one set of rules for in-person voting. You start on the first day being able to run a zero tape, and you can end the day, the election period on election day by running a tally tape, and you can know exactly what the vote was in the precinct right after the polls close, rather than waiting for the votes to be assembled from all over the county, put together with some may be missing, some may get voted twice, but then sent on to the state without any reconciliation back to what was actually voted in the county. And where we've been able to get the data, and that's one of the problems we have, is our rules are such that it makes it almost impossible to do any kind of reasonable audit in a reasonable amount of time. But where we've been able to do it, we found that the vote differs from the precinct to the county to the state, sometimes by just a few votes, sometimes by a lot of votes. And we've had instances where there are a significant difference in the number of votes cast, found after the fact. This would allow us to be able to do things more real time in tracking the votes. And so This was a step moving in that direction. I much would like to just combine the two and make it for the entire election period. 21 other states do it, so there's no reason Texas couldn't.
But there doesn't seem to be a big outcry from people, or even the Secretary of State, the former Secretary of State, John Scott. He released a audit for the 2020 general election, and while there were some issues in some counties, overall there's no widespread problems.
Well, first of all, you might notice that we have a new head of Office of Elections, and we have a new Secretary of State. And I don't think that's by accident. And those folks, you said no outcry, depends on who you're listening to. If you're listening to the folks who pay attention to elections and have been watching them, participated in the audience, you'll find a huge outcry where we have found inconsistencies that are unexplainable because the system is so complicated. The average person doesn't pay any attention to elections, and they show up to vote. Matter of fact, where we have had people be issued, and we found it's far more widespread than anybody knows about, where the ballot is printed in countywide voting. As you go in, we're not even sure how many people have actually voted the wrong ballot, but didn't know it because the only names they knew were at the top of the ballot. And those at the bottom, they had no idea who they were on there. And I'll try to explain what happens when you go in and give your identification where the ballot is printed, basically with the poll book. When you arrive there, they enter your ID information, which includes your precinct, and then they print the ballot, and you take that and vote it, and so on to the next person in line. We discovered incidences when the person gave the information, they attempted to print the ballot, push the print button, and nothing happened. Push it again and nothing happened. Did it a third time, and it printed the ballot. So he took the ballot, went off to vote. Next person in line, which was from a different precinct, provided their information, and they hit the print button and it printed, but it printed the ballot, the identical ballot to what was issued to the person ahead of them. It was just still in the print queue. And so that would happen on down the line. And that's been demonstrated. Yep, that's indeed what happens when you get an interruption, because you remember you're operating over with internet connections. So that's just one problem that comes from the complication that we have of the so-called countywide voting that would be eliminated with precinct voting. And I could go through several others. And if you take a look at those audits that were done and look at the critiques that were done by the people who really understand the election process, you'll find that those audits were I'll just say lacking in comprehension of exactly what was happening.
Let me ask you about, again, just going back to, I know for you, this was incremental, but what is the difference between, a voting center, having people vote anywhere they want in the county on the early vote compared to on election day?
It should be done in both, but it was a matter of being able to make an incremental move by getting at least election day. And hopefully by the time we go through another process and people realize that it is okay, that it works out to be able to vote in your neighborhood, that there's no problem with it. I mean, we have a lot of counties that do that now. And so what we have are administrators who like to run their little fiefdom the way they want it done and don't want anybody else messing with it. And the biggest argument I've heard against it is, well, that's just not the way we do it. And when I've sat down with administrators who were adamantly opposed to some of the changes I'm talking about, by the time I explained how it will be easier and simpler for people to vote, easier to operate, and have a higher confidence in the accuracy of what's happening, they were in favor of it. Most of the people who are opposed to it are those who haven't given it any thought, other than the fact that it might be more convenient for me to wait to vote where I work than where I live. or somewhere along the way?
Usually I was looking at the bill analysis, and usually on some of these bills, obviously some are really long bills, and yours is, I think, 3 pages. So, but when you look at an analysis, sometimes there's a lot of information, a lot of analysis, but there wasn't much, that in this Senate Research Center's analysis as to why this was necessary. Why is that?
Okay.
In other words, the justification. A lot of the times there's justifications, a lot of it in an analysis, et cetera, even from the author. But here, it's basically a page and a half.
Okay. It's like the other way around. What's the justification for not voting in the precinct? We have precincts for a reason, and we certainly need to be able to track the votes to make sure that the votes go from the voter themselves to the county to the state. And when you have the votes for a particular precinct spread all over the county, onesie twosies here and there, you've got to go through a rather elaborate integration process to pull all those votes together to make sure. And it's extremely difficult to audit that because of the large number, particularly in the larger counties. When people could simplify the process by voting close to home in their precinct where they live, and many of them even work there, but where they live. And so the votes from a precinct for each of the ballot items would be quickly, easily identified as soon as the polls close. And you wouldn't have to integrate them, bring them together, do another computer processing, which we do know computers have been known to make mistakes. Just the error of handling data is reduced. And so by doing this, you could know as soon as the polls close exactly what the votes were for that precinct for each of the ballot items.
So you think it'll speed? I'm sorry. You think it'll speed up the results being released on election day?
Oh, yes. If we go to where we're trying to go with this, and that's a single in-person voting period, in which you're able to run a 0 tapes just before the polls open on the first day. You run the tally tape immediately after the polls close, and the election administrator posts the results from the precinct. Then you know what those precinct votes are. And when the county puts them together, and we have many instances when county has put the votes together, they have had more votes than what were cast in a precinct, than they've had fewer votes than what were cast as it moved forward. We had an incident down in Hill County not too long ago that actually ended up with almost 1,900 more votes than people showed up at the polls. And it took a tremendous amount of work to try to come up with an answer for that. And it's not the only place that has happened. And so this would greatly simplify it, making the results available at the precinct level immediately after the polls close.
In 2021, Republicans said, when they were discussing the election integrity bills at the time, 2 years ago, Republicans often said, they want to make voting easier and make it harder to cheat. And I'm wondering, does the fact that you would seek to take away a voting center on election day, does that take away the convenience of making it easier for people to vote?
I think it changes it. I don't think the difference between being able to, drive to any part of the county and vote, and being able to vote in your precinct, some might consider that to be an inconvenience, but I think the security of an election is far more important than the convenience of voting.
And I'm sure you've seen the criticism. One group called Common Cause Texas said that Republicans are trying to make voting as inconvenient as possible, particularly in the big metro areas where the majority of people impacted will be Black and brown Texans. What do you say to that?
Simply not true. I mean, it's just a presumption. It's like the same arguments that threw up last time about no matter what the change was, it was discriminating. It's not true. The reason for it is to put security ahead of convenience. It is more important for us to have an election in which we have a high degree of confidence in the accuracy of the outcome than it is for a few conveniences here and there.
And my last question to you, Senator, and I appreciate your time. Do you think that this bill will pass in the House?
I have no magic ball for determining what the House is going to do. I've talked to a number of people over there that said this sounds like a good idea over there, but until it gets there and actually goes through the process, I have no way of knowing what bills. I have not been a good predictor of what will pass and what doesn't pass in the House. I've been surprised on both directions. And so I worry more about what I have a direct control over, and that is what I do here in the Senate, and then informing people so that they make a decision based on the facts. My biggest concern about getting a bill passed are people who say, oh, we can't do that. And they do it based on misinformation. They do it on a misconception of what it is, or a lack of thorough understanding, because their minds were bent by misstatements from organizations like what you just read from, which is actually absolutely not true. And so my biggest concern is making sure they're informed, and I will live with whatever decision they make, so long as they make it on the same set of truths.
Republican State Senator Bob Hall of the 2nd Senate District, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack. Always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you, sir.
Likewise.